Rick, thank you again, man, for just like riffing with me, man, talking, fellowshipping with me. I'm so grateful.
Oh, Keith, the pleasure is all mine. And there's no one on the planet I'd rather talk with. That's why we do these dang things. We're not paid. We don't have a grant. It's just two guys talking about things that they've experienced in their lives. And I can't think of a better person to do it with than you. So thank
Oh,
you.
oh, thank you, Rick, man. I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful for the folks who listen to, the shows and who, ask questions and also contribute to our learning and our growth. I'm grateful for them as well, man.
For sure.
So the topic of this show is the world isn't stopping me. My blockages are.
That's a little close to the bone. Let's pick another one.
No, we're staying there, buddy. We're staying there.
All right, fair enough.
I've been thinking a lot about this, man. I think I've mentioned this to you before, is that the way that I have experienced the world has been, I thought I was experiencing the world as it is, right? And I don't know who said this, and whether it was a psychologist or someone who said it, or a psychiatrist or whoever said it, but it was something like, you're not experiencing the world, the world, you're experiencing your view of the world,
Right.
So, and I'm not experiencing the world, I'm experiencing my limits of the world. And so for limits, another word is barriers or blockages and things like this. So when I look back, an example might be helpful. When I look back at my childhood, there's so much that I blamed on my stepfather for that experience during my childhood. And as I mentioned in previous podcasts, this is very abusive. The behavior for my stepfather was abusive. It took me years, decades to not confuse his behavior with who he is at his core. Who he is at his core is like all of us, just consciousness, it's light, it's love. But there's these blockages that are in the way. And so in my opinion, that's what dictates the behavior when we show up as unkind, not loving, and not, peaceful and our true selves, our higher selves. So this is how I saw my stepfather. And so, but long after I left home and I was no longer at the effect of that abuse, yelling at me, saying things, or being physically abusive. I left home at 17. So, but up until 38, I was still like carrying that with me. It was as if it was still happening, but I'm no longer in that situation. So here's a blockage. And the blockage had a lot of I guess, for lack of a better word, a lot of negative consequences or effects, which were my inability to be really close to people and let them in, to not be honest about what my upbringing was about. I was not honest about it for a long time. I would say I grew up in this really like great household, where there was all this, both parents, my mom was fantastic, but both parents were loving and they were just so supportive. And my stepfather wasn't that, his behavior wasn't. So, but that was one of the consequences, is that I was not honest. I lacked integrity whenever people asked me about, the way I grew up in my childhood. I could have just said, hey, I choose not to share. I could have done that, and still been honest about it. But there was a lot of shame over it. But there were these blockages. And so Michael Singer, who I like, the author of Untethered Soul and the Surrender Experiment, which we both have read, he talks about like once you become aware of this blockage, like I did with my stepfather, and for some people maybe therapy or somebody that guides you is helpful to help you, trace that back. But what I found is back then it was necessary for me to I want to be free of it. Mm-hmm. And what helped me get free of it was not somebody who said, you need to get rid of this, but I had created this goal, for lack of a better word, of how I want to experience life. And I wanted to, I was 38 and I knew I wanted to be peaceful. And what someone told me is this thing with your stepfather is in the way of you experiencing some peace. Like you need to have peace around this. And so because I had this higher goal, they helped me kind of do it. Like there was something that I wanted. And this was in the way. So I jumped all over it, like what they suggested. And so there's a whole apology exercise that was involved, which was helpful. Now I don't need those things because I've continued on the path, and that's great. But what they didn't help me see and maybe they tried to, and I just wasn't conscious enough to do it, is that after I left my stepfather's home and I was no longer experiencing that physically, then what's keeping that so real for me? What's keeping it for me personally? And this could be different for other people, but it was me. So if I'm having this inner disturbance, that whenever I thought about my stepfather, somebody brought it up, or I felt like I was experiencing some kind of pain in my life, I would go back to like this childhood or this, or whenever I was striving to be the exact opposite of my stepfather and all the suffering that comes with striving, I would point back to this. So this blockage is still very much showing up in my life, even though I'm no longer in that house, like it's still showing up. So Michael Singer says that one day you wake up and you imagine this flow of water going down the stream, but there's this big rock that's in the way. And it is just like it's causing this disturbance, like the water has to go around it. There's no flow. And this is what was happening. There was no flow with me in different important parts of my life. And so you become aware that, oh, there's this rock here. This was what's causing it. So you reach down and to remove the rock with your left hand. So you take your left hand, you reach down to remove the rock for your left hand. And then as you're about to move it, you discover that your right hand is holding it in place. I've been holding it the whole time.
Yeah.
And that's what I realized, man. It's like
great.
that event with my stepfather happened decades ago. Mm-hmm. I'm holding it there. I've seen people do this with divorces that are over. They're still talking about their exes. And even if you're in a joint custody battle, and our friend Tim has been a great example of this. And when he went through his divorce, he worked on, I'm going to show up loving, regardless of how they show up, how they treat, even if they try to make it difficult with custody and parenting and visitation schedules or the financial pieces of getting a divorce, that's their path. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show up as loving. Like he literally made a point of not holding the rock in place, of that barrier in place. And that's what I started to do in the workplace. If somebody says something during the workday, I'm not bringing that home. I'm not holding that. That happened in the workplace. It's done. I'm on. I'm moving on. Period. And I'm not doing it in a way to where I'm sending them any kind of ill will. I'm not doing that either. I want to be free of that, because sending out ill will, being vindictive, mean-spirited, feeling wrong. If you do any of that, if you experience any of that, you're holding the rock in place. And I want to be completely free of that, man. So, this goes back to the title, like the world isn't stopping me. My barriers are, and once I choose to let them go, and I'm not taking any kind of like aggressive action or suppressing anything. I'm simply just leaning back.
There you go.
And just letting them go.
There you go.
Period. That's it. It's the easiest thing, once you become aware of how easy it is. And if you're like, I can't let this go, you don't have to. You can keep living that way. It's up to you. But we are on this steady march to death. And is that how you want to keep, walking along this path, this journey to zero, holding on to these rocks and barriers? You can. Well, I can't let them get away with this. Newsflash, that's not your call. Like what they get away with. You punishing them? No, you're punishing yourself. Like period. And I just let go of all that, man. So I've just really, really stopped holding those rocks in place. It's a beautiful thing, Rick.
Yeah, and it shows in the way you live your life and how people regard you and want to be around you because of that. I think you're right, Keith. It's totally true that the obstacles in our life are self-made. And, when you were using that analogy of the hands, one hand trying to remove an obstacle, the other hand holding it in place, the hardest thing to do when you start the practice is to monitor the hand that's holding the obstacle in place. That's the hardest thing to think of, because we're trained and we believe that what causes all of our problems is other people or other things or circumstances. Well, there's always going to be stimulus, always going to be stimulus. And if you just look at everything as a stimulus rather than put a value judgment on it, And then you start to look at what you do in terms of reacting to that stimulus. That's the first place to start. Am I really making this out to be something more than it is? And usually it's not about the obstacle. It's about something that you don't want to have happen, or
Right.
something that you want to have happen that isn't happening. It's that expectation that causes the suffering. And, all of our lives, we're going to be beset by unexpected circumstance. In fact, that's the whole story of life, right? One damn thing after another. Mark Twain said life is just one damn thing after another. And it's true. It's like once we click off on this podcast, maybe my heater will be broken, or I'll have some damage done to my car by some thoughtless person in a parking lot. Whatever it is that's upsetting, it is. Or your kids are going to let you down because you had all planned out how they were going to do their homework, or they were going to clean their room, or they were going to do X, Y, and Z, and they didn't do any of it. So now it's your turn to deal with that. And you have a choice. Am I going to hold the rock down, or am I going to pick it up? And part of it, as you say, is leaning back and letting it go. Here's something else I think that's really important. And we haven't talked about this in any of our podcasts, but I think it's very important to recognize. Not only is life one damn thing after another, it's completely random. It's completely beyond your control. And, once you kind of get used to the idea that, hey, I'm not a bad person because random bad things happen to me, that's just everybody's story. It's just whether it's the degree that you experience or not. So the only difference between you and another human is the amount of randomness in their lives. And so getting comfortable with randomness, getting comfortable with chaos, developing an attitude that doesn't cause you to push that rock in the stream that interrupts the flow down and prevents you from participating in the flow of life. Anything like that, that's what you need to be examining. Anyway, I think that's a wonderful examination, the idea of the obstacle in the stream, and you're holding it down yourself. Just look at that, folks. Just look at that. I do that myself. Am I causing this problem? Guy cuts me off in traffic. I got to go crazy and teach him a lesson. No, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. It's just your ego saying, hey, I'm important. Show me some respect. Well, respect yourself. You don't have to beat him over the head to get respect.
No.
Anyway, I think that's a hard lesson to get, but you'll lessen your suffering the more you understand that you are mostly at cause for all the obstacles in your life, that randomness is the rule, and how you respond to it is going to be the measure of whether you have a joyful life of peace and happiness, or whether you're freaked out and acting out and nobody wants to be around you.
Exactly, Rick. We should really do a podcast on the randomness, because I think that would be really valuable to me to hear you share more about it. And I'm sure it'll help me create some insights for myself as well. To close this thing off here, this podcast with the barriers, is that it's easy the mind will say, not the conscious self, because the conscious self totally gets that, don't hold the barriers in place.
Right.
But the mind will say, but are you saying don't do anything? No, if there's action to be taken, you want your conscious self free of barriers.
That's right.
To be the part that takes the action. With the mind even asking that question when the mind asks a question like that, you know what it's doing? It's doubling down on holding that barrier in place. Even ask the question to do that. No, we're talking about going with the flow so you can be more effective.
Yeah.
If there's things that you need to resolve or to improve, and there's a lot of examples that we can give, man. I mean, we can go from take, for example, race, and if you're carrying that pain or that collective pain on it, but for the change that you really want, and you got to think about, what do you really want? Or you just want to be okay right now in this moment, and this person to pay for this? That's one way to do it. It's short-lived, it's temporary, but you're just going to set yourself up to experience more of whatever it is that you don't want. Or you can be like, how do I work with others to create change that's more sustainable and lasting? And oftentimes that's going to mean working with people that before represented your barriers that you were holding down. And so you let that go so that you can work with people that may have a different idea, different approach to resolve something. But the mind, it will never come up with an idea like that because it is committed to holding barriers down and knows nothing else. It just creates barriers unless it's directed. And then you direct it from coming from a peaceful place. And that is just really, that's so effective. But man, so, I mean, every day, man, as I mentioned, I wake up, how can I be a contribution to humanity? The practice gets me started, and the practice helps me to be aware of all the barriers that in place. Somebody doesn't say anything to me or doesn't value what I do, or the mind tells me they've wronged me, they have ignored my contribution, they didn't show that they love me, they didn't call me back, they didn't invite me. Whatever that stuff does, my conscious self is this, looks like there's a barrier. Are you going to, remove it, or are you going to hold it down? And most times people are unaware that there's a choice.
That's right.
And for me, when I see, that's a potential barrier, it's like, nah, we're not gonna put that in place. We're just gonna continue with the flow.
There you go.
I'll just flow merrily down the stream, Rick. Just flow.
That's it, baby. Let's flow right out of here, brother.
That's it. That's a choice. I love you, Rick.
I love you, Keith. Great show, man. I love listening to you and your life experiences. I get so much out of it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rick.